Um, and our speaker today is Jason Owen-Smith. He's the Executive Director of IRIS and a Professor of Sociology at the University of Michigan. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function here, and I will either rudely interrupt Jason with your questions, or we can save them to the end, depending on how they kind of flow into the presentation. And with that, I will just hand it over to Jason. Thank you all for coming.
Hi, everyone. Let me add my thanks to Dan's. Really a pleasure to have you all join us today. As you said, I'm Jason Owen-Smith. I'm going to organize this session in basically 3 parts, but they're loose. Initially, I want to provide to everybody who's here for the first time what we promised, which is IRIS 101. So we're going to begin with an overview of what the Institute for Research on Innovation and Science, IRIS, is and does. We're recording that portion of the discussion so that we can make it available to folks on the website and on YouTube. We'll then pause for a second, take any questions, and stop recording in order to give you some demonstrations of some of the data products that we'll discuss that we build and return to our universities. And I'll talk a little bit more about why we're stopping recording when we get to the privacy and confidentiality section of our conversation. And then I want to make sure that we pause for Q&A. As Dan said, I'm very happy not even to be rudely interrupted, though if Dan wants to kick over a chair and wave his fist or something, I'll certainly respond. But I would encourage you to ask questions as they come up. Also, I would remind you that because we are recording this portion, if you ask questions, you'll hear us refer to them and to you. So be aware that this part is being recorded. Again, thanks for joining us. I'll go ahead and get started. So what is IRIS? The Institute for Research on Innovation and Science is formally an IRB-approved data repository housed at the University of Michigan in the Institute for Social Research, which is a large interdisciplinary social science institute that's dedicated to large-scale collection, protection, and use of various types of social science data. IRIS, as a data repository, is the anchor for a consortium of major research institutions around the country who share data with IRIS in order to help us achieve our mission, which is broadly to better understand, explain, and hopefully improve what you might call the public value of the academic research mission and of higher education generally. I won't spend a ton of time on the history because we've been established since 2015. We're going into our 8th year, so there's a track record. But IRIS grew out of a federal initiative called STAR-METRICS that many of you might have participated in. This was an effort led by an interagency working group that was housed in the National Institutes of Health for several years to help universities do reporting on funds they received under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, ARA, what's broadly known as the stimulus package during the last Great Recession. The idea there was that universities would extract data from their administrative systems, share them with NIH, and NIH would help them calculate things like jobs numbers, which are generally hard for universities to calculate. Starting in about 2010, this was going on, and in about 2012, a group of us, the co-founders of IRIS, are myself, Julia Lane, who's currently at NYU, and Bruce Weinberg, who's currently at Ohio State University, recognized that there was potentially great value in these kinds of data for research and reporting about how academic research worked and about what it did, both in terms of how money was spent and how it had an impact on a larger society. So we began working with then the Big Ten, then the Committee on Interinstitutional Cooperation, now the Big Ten Academic Alliance universities, and particularly the Senior Research Officers Group, to pilot the necessary framework to move from a federal program focused on reporting to a more integrative, university-led and academically driven program focused on research to understand, explain, improve, etc. IRIS was founded in 2015. We've been operating since then, and we'll talk a little bit more about what we do. This is a somewhat intimidating diagram, but IRIS has a lot of moving parts, so it's worth spending a moment or two to walk through it. The core idea here is that member institutions, universities that choose to join our consortium, support IRIS by sharing data. We'll talk a little bit more about what membership entails in a second, but for now, what happens is that individual institutions draw from their administrative data systems from a combination typically of HR, procurement, and sponsored projects data stacks on campus, transaction level information about the direct cost expenditures on federal and non-federal research grants. What that means is that universities essentially deposit with IRIS data about all of the people employed on research grants, all of the goods and services purchased to support research on research grants, and all of the subawards to other performers of research that expand research teams beyond a single institution. Those data are submitted through a secure data portal, which you'll see when we get to the demo portion. Once they land in IRIS's secure data facility, we do a ton of work with them, both to clean and integrate them in collaboration with data contacts at the individual universities, and also to improve them through linkage to a variety of other data sources. Those include public data on the contents of federal grants, abstracts, PIs, total amounts, information on the funders themselves, data on the career outcomes of individuals, particularly students and trainees paid on grants, business data that allows us to understand more about the vendors who make up the academic research supply chain and support research in that fashion, data on publications and patent outcomes, as well as on the order of about 50 other data sources that do everything from help us to geolocate at a fine-grained level of information, employers and vendors, to helping us ensure that we're associating some of our reporting, which you'll see, particularly with things like current congressional or state legislative districts. We take all of those data, and under our MOUs with our participating universities, we have a set of partnerships that allows us to transfer those data to established partners who are approved by our board of directors. Our board of directors is elected to represent the membership of the universities. Partners are right now things like the US Census Bureau, one of our key partners, and another, the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics. In both those cases, we make our data that comes from the university members available for the purposes of linking to data produced by the federal agencies. In the case of the Census Bureau, we make data linkages to what's called the longitudinal employer household dynamics data set at the individual level. That's a data set, or actually I should say census makes those linkages. We do not, they're made in the census data system. But the LEHD is a data set based on state unemployment insurance records that allows us to see employment information and wage payments for people who are basically in all sectors of the US economy. We also make linkages to the longitudinal business database, which is another tax-based database that tells us a great deal of information about organizations, businesses, nonprofits, and other organizations that are vendors to universities or employers of those who worked on academic grants. For the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, we make linkages to survey data that they collect, most notably the Survey of Earned Doctorates, which provides a sort of population level cross-section of information drawn from surveys of essentially all doctoral recipients in the country. Those data are then used for two purposes. First, we de-identify and document a research data set We've just released our fifth, the UMETRICS 2022 dataset, which I'll talk to you about in a second. Those data, with the linkages that we make, are available to research users through a secure virtual data enclave maintained here at the Institute for Social Research. Right? A mirror of the research data set that IRIS produces is made available along with crosswalks to Census Bureau information through the Census Bureau's secure research data center system. It's a system of physical data enclaves that Census controls access to. And once the final documentation and development of the reports are done, restricted data from NCSES, a mirror of the UMETRICS data, and relevant crosswalks to that will be available through the NCSES's data products. So our primary goal in all of this is to produce and sustain a data set that can support a wide range of research to help us better understand how money flowing into academic research institutions has an effect and an impact on our society and on the progress of knowledge. But we also use all of these data and all of these linkages to produce a set of reports and tools that flow back to our member institutions. Right now, there are a suite of 9 standard products that member institutions receive and that they can use for a variety of use cases, ranging from, graduate deans interested in the outcomes of their PhD students in terms of careers, to government relations efforts at the state and federal level, and communication about university activities, as well as some research development and faculty development work. As I said, our marquee product, if you will, is the research data set. So every 2 years now, we release a data set that includes de-identified information that's drawn from all of our universities, plus information from the linkages we make. So the 2022 data release, which has just been made available through our virtual data enclave, we'll talk about how people can access that and the security restrictions in a second, has information on over 535,000 funded federal and non-federal awards that account for about $127 billion in sponsored project spending. That includes payments to nearly 1 million individual vendor establishments and wages paid to about 865,000 employees. That's faculty, students, staff, and trainees, and it includes students at all levels, undergraduate through doctoral. This is the core data set to which we also provide linkages to a variety of scientific and other outcomes. And this is the core data set, which is linked to Census Bureau information available through the RDC system, and will be, we're in the process now, linked to NCSES data and available through their restricted data access processes. Access is open, not open in the sense of anyone can download these data off of an FTP server because they are restricted data and we protect them as such. But the goal of IRIS is to make these data available for research to the broadest possible community of users we can. We identify and distinguish between research uses of the data and program evaluation uses of the data. So the system I'm going to tell you about is aimed at the researchers, but individual universities who participate can also access their data through our system with the variety of linkages in order to do their own work. The way this is set up, member institutions, their affiliates receive free access to the data. Those who are not at member institutions are required to pay a small seat fee in order to access the data and the research support and privacy disclosure review that is necessary. Accessing the data set requires a signed data use agreement between the home institution of the researcher and the University of Michigan, an IRB designation, either approving a project, declaring it exempt or declaring it non-regulated, depended on what research is being done with the data, and participation in a small training about how to use our virtual data enclave responsibly and successfully. Why should universities join IRIS? Well, we've sort of suggested a bunch of these, but in short version, This is an academically owned, a university owned and operated system to facilitate research and to make sure that we translate the results of that research back to participating institutions in a usable format. In order to do that, we do a lot of work to improve the data that universities submit, and you have access to the improved data. We construct that research data set at regular intervals, protect it, and make it available through secure channels to the broader research community. We develop and share back with your institution that suite of 9 reports that I'll talk about in a moment and give you some. And we are also increasingly are using data across Irish universities to provide information for stakeholders who are not themselves universities, notably federal agencies and academic associations who have reasons to be interested in, for instance, the economic impact of their spending portfolios. All of these are reasons, I think, to think about IRIS as a resource for higher education, both to develop more knowledge about itself and more effectively to tell its own story to relevant constituencies. You can see some of that happening, and this is just a smattering of things that have come out recently, both as individual universities, such as the University of Michigan or the University of Kansas, both of which are IRIS members, release press releases or develop videos or other materials that highlight how their IRIS data helps to explain their role in their state or in the nation. You can also see here some recent publications that have come out of IRIS's work, including a recent one on science advances, which was authored by Bruce Weinberg and colleagues, that does a really nice job of using these rich data to estimate the effects of federal investments in research on the members of a research team, the students and postdocs who might not themselves be a PI on the team and who are hard to see absent data like this. We also do a lot of work, the other Harvard Data Science Review paper, to develop and sustain the necessary institutional and technical arrangements to make sure that this is both a responsible and an equitable data system that allows a wide range of users to use the data without running the risk of leaving these restricted data unprotected. In order to join IRIS, we've talked a little bit about why one might want to. This is what one has to do. Universities get a bunch of things for joining IRIS, as we've said: access to the UMETRICS data for your researchers, a set of reports, a voice in governance, help in defining, the ability to help in defining the next wave of products we develop, and having yourself represented in these larger reports that go to other stakeholders. But there are things that are also required of members. As I said, the primary thing that our member institutions do is provide data under an MOU template, which we'd be happy to share with any of you. Please reach out to me or to Nancy Calvin-Naylor or to Dan. We're happy to send you our basic packet of information about what it takes to join IRIS. We ask for 2 points of contact on each campus that joins us. One is what we call the data contact. This is typically a business analyst in sponsored projects or central IT, who is the person who pulls the data and who works with Kevin Bjorn, our technical director's team, to submit the data and to do quality assurance on it. We also ask for a communications contact. This is typically someone in an executive officer or dean's office, an associate vice president or vice chancellor for research, for instance, who is the person who receives reports and information we convey to them, who casts the vote for, or that makes the nominations from their campus for our board of directors, and who works closely with our communications and other teams in order to better make use of the data. Finally, joining IRIS requires a membership contribution. The infrastructure you've seen is supported about 40% by contributions from member institutions, which are what allow us to do the sorts of things that could not be easily supported by, for instance, federal grants. That includes our research support mechanisms, much of the work we do to aid our members in communication and use of their reports, and the maintenance and workings of the data infrastructure that provides security and privacy protection itself. This is a growing community, and we encourage you. In fact, we hope that some of you will reach out to start a conversation about your campus. Just in recent months, we've added 4 new members, and I wanted to highlight them here in part because they suggest the wide range of types of institutions that are starting to be involved in IRIS. Georgia Tech, the University of Kentucky, Arizona State University, the University of California, Riverside, which is our first minority serving institution. We'd love to be able to bring in more institutions that are HBCUs or HSIs or other minority serving institutions, and Wayne State University have all joined us recently. And each of those offers some examples of the different ways in which universities can derive value from participating. For instance, Wayne State's membership brings all 3 of the public research institutions in the state of Michigan into the IRIS consortium, and collectively that allows for some aggregate state level reporting that those 3 institutions can use together as they're trying to explain to, for instance, our state legislature, the value of research institutions generally to the state of Michigan. I'm going to take a deep breath there for a second and then talk a little bit about the reporting that comes out. I said there's a suite of 9 reports. I'm not going to walk through all 9 here as examples, but to give you a flavor for them before we demo, right, the first report that a university receives from IRIS, an interactive dashboard that we code and that is served through a secure data enclave server that you maintain the passwords and accesses to. It's what we call our spending report. It gives you basic information and some basic benchmarking about where vendor spending goes and who the people are that are doing the work of externally funded research on your campus. Our vendor profile report makes use of linkages we draw to data sourced from Bureau van Dijk, the Orbis dataset, about businesses, and it provides information about the geographic locations, the industries, and the other characteristics of organizations that are vendors to universities, the academic supply chain, if you will. Our current employee report, this iteration that is currently out in the world and being released, draws from a partnership with a corporation called Stepping Blocks. Stepping Blocks is a data science firm that mines public profile information, things like LinkedIn, for information about employment. The employee profile report allows us to report to you all on the locations, the estimated earnings, and the employers of individuals who were paid on your grants. And it's primarily used to understand some of the career outcomes, especially of graduate students and trainees who may not have stayed in academia or who might move back and forth between academia and non-academic locations. Finally, we have a suite of reports that we've developed in concert with our government relations colleagues at a variety of universities that break down spending and impact and aid in the telling of stories about a university's impact by federal and state, congressional or legislative district, and also a tool called the Impact Finder, which allows us to make data available to our universities in a format that can be searched and filtered by folks who may be engaged in the communications effort, but may not have the time or energy to go and write the SQL code that would pull data directly from our systems. I see there is a question, and I've come to the question section. So is Northeastern University? No, at this point, Northeastern University is not a member, but I'd be very happy to have them be a member. If you'd be interested in learning more, please reach out to us. Are there any other questions at this point? Can industry and business be members? It's a great question. We have not yet had businesses be members. There is in principle no reason why they couldn't, because businesses like universities maintain these data that we collect for the same kinds of purposes: compliance, taxes, all of those good financial reasons. I think the value proposition for a business to join probably depends on their industry and on the proximity of those industries to academic research, but it's something that we've often considered as one possible extension, and I'd be happy to talk about it. In terms of federal agencies, we have not had a federal agency be a member in terms of submitting their own data. We do, however, have a number of different partnerships with federal agencies, and one could imagine, for instance, that agencies that do significant intramural research could be members in this kind of framework. And so again, our goal is as broadly as possible to understand how public investments in research, particularly fundamental and academic research, have a broader impact on our society. And we recognize that that reaches far beyond universities. So one of the things we've tried to do is build a system that has the possibility of expanding in these directions.